Alright, what's up guys? So, we're running out of time here. We're getting close to the end of the semester, so I figured one of the best ways for us to make sure that we get all of the stuff that we need to finished in time and you make sure you know all the content that you need to, that these videos would be a more efficient way for us to cover the information outside of class and then be able to go over it in class. So anyway, let's roll through this here and start talking about sectionalism. So, the essential question, how did westward expansion increase sectional tensions between the North and South from 1820 to 1850? There's a reason that we talk about westward expansion before we talk about sectionalism, and that's because westward expansion, the movement to the west, occupying this new land and this new territory, is the primary reason for the sectional differences, the splitting of the United States into the two different parts that we see when the Civil War does start. So keep that essential question in mind. We're going to go over it in class, do a little writing assignment with that, and make sure that we are able to appropriately answer that once we have finished the notes for this. But again, how did westward expansion increase sectional tensions between the North and South from 1820 to 1850? Next up on here, there's vocab terms. I'm going to go through each of these terms while we're doing this video so that we can be sure that you know what these are, and we will do the why, what, and the impact for these as well. But just going over the what during this video is what we'll be doing here. So keep all those in mind as well, and let's roll. So this is an image that we will go over in class, just two different images of the United States in terms of the free and the slave territories, slave states, free states within the United States. After the Missouri Compromise and after the Compromise of 1820, the questions are what major changes took place from 1820 to 1850. We should know that pretty well. And were these changes good or bad for the U.S.? And it really could be both. So think about reasons why they could be good and why they could be bad as well, because these things aren't happening, just constant bad things. There's good reasons that these are happening as well. Boop. So from 1800 to 1860, the North and South became vastly different regions. We talked about that when we talked about the market revolution and the presidency of James Monroe, and we really start to see those differences kind of come to light here. We've talked already about the North being mainly industrial, creating a lot of manufactured products up there, whereas the South remains mostly agricultural because of the development of the cotton gin and the growth of cotton in the South. Immigrants coming into the northern portions as well from Europe and just occupying that new demand for labor within the North. None of those immigrants are really going into the South because there really isn't a place for them in the South. You won't see a huge immigrant population down there because the South depends primarily upon slave labor, and they don't really need anything else. Slave labor is enough for the South. So there's not much of a difference in terms of the population in the South, as there has always been. It's mostly African slaves or African American slaves and these wealthy plantation owners, and then poor white farmers as well, and that's really it. You also have these immigrant populations that are up in the North that kind of have seen the situation in the North, aren't finding the jobs that they need to, and see this opportunity out in the West and start to move out that way. So you'll see a lot of these new states and new territories are primarily occupied by these new types of people, these new immigrants from Europe moving off into the West for this new opportunity, the chance for land ownership, the chance to kind of make your own life, live the American dream. You see here cotton production just going up from 1800 to 1860, and of course we know that's because of the cotton gin. King Cotton here had transformed the South into a rural region with slavery, little manufacturing, and few railroads. And that few railroads is going to be really impactful and really significant when we get around to the Civil War, because one important thing with railroads is that they are a means of transportation, not just for goods but also for people. They're able to, the North during the Civil War, get troops where they need to much quicker than the South is able to, just because of that large expanse of railroads that are available to Northerners. They could transport troops and transport materials wherever it is they need to very quickly. So just keep it in your head that these regions are very different, and it's primarily because of the economies they have and what those economies are based on. Also, just to give you an idea of the slave populations, I think we've seen this already from 1820 to 1860, but just to reiterate, the slave population in the United States South has become ridiculous. There's a ridiculous amount of slaves, and you can see not only has the amount of slaves within the South increased, but it's also moved further westward as well. When you compare these maps, you have Missouri here, and they're also moving down into what is now Texas. So you see slavery is inching its way further westward in these slave states. So anyway, talked about this already. The North had industrial factories, cities, paid immigrant workers, railroads, and a much larger population as well. The southern population is not as high as it is going to be in the North. There's a lot more people living in the North. There's a lot more people living in these urban cities, closely compact. And that's going to also be really impactful during the Civil War as well. The North just has more people available to them that can fight within that war. Just a graph breaking down the types of people that are living within the United States as well. Most of these immigrants, as time wears on, because of the demand from labor, are coming from Europe. And you can see a good majority of the population within the United States are going to be European immigrants. These people that are just fresh into the country here. The smallest portion coming from South America, not terribly significant. The North American population, not terribly significant there as well. Just some of the developments that are coming along as well, not just the railroad, but this is probably going to be the most significant is the railroads, but also the steamboat, the use of canals for the transportation of goods as well. Right here's where the Erie Canal was that we've talked about already, linking the industrial east and the more agricultural west, this breadbasket for the United States, transporting this food to the rest of America, to the northerners and to the southerners who are only growing cotton. So they don't really have food available to them, but it's cheaper for them to just grow cotton and have that food shipped in for them to grow it themselves. And just looking at this map one more time, just notice the fact that these railroads are just so highly concentrated within the North. There is just so much more available to Northerners in terms of transportation when it comes to canals, which are these green lines here, and then railroads, which are etched all across the northern portion of the United States here. Much less available to Southerners there, and a lot of these don't even really connect. Like, what's happening here? This is just random railroad right here. I don't know what that's supposed to be doing. But a hodgepodge of railroads here and not very many down there. So, all of these regional differences are going to increase and cause this thing called sectionalism within the United States, which I've referred to before, but I don't know if I've given you an actual definition of it. And all sectionalism is placing the interests of a region above the interests of the nation. In the era of good feelings, it's the nation. You have a very nationalistic sense of America and the population. Everybody loves being an American. But as time wears on, you start to see people more concentrated and more concerned with their own particular region. Southerners care about the Southern way of life. Northerners care about the Northern way of life. And they don't concern themselves with each other too terribly much. The West, meanwhile, kind of aligning itself more so with the North than they are anything else. Sectionalism from 1820 to 1850 is also going to be something that's pretty mild. It's not going to lead to very huge impactful events because most of the time these issues are solved by compromise. Sometimes temporary compromise and sometimes compromise that a lot of people don't really care for, but compromise nonetheless. Both of these groups, South and North, coming together and going, okay, what's something that we can do to solve this problem here and now that will appease each side? So the first major issue, and something we've talked about several times in class, and you should hopefully be familiar with at this point, is going to be when Missouri wants to admit itself into the Union as a state in 1820. It's the Missouri Compromise, or the... Yeah. Alright, sorry, little interruption there. Anyway, so, Missouri Compromise, familiar with it already. May Status Compromise 1820. So, Missouri wants to be admitted into the Union. Wants to become a state. Was a little territory. Missouri Territory right here. And this is where the state of Missouri will be eventually. And they want to become a happy little state. But there's an issue. Balance of power. Talked about it already. Going to talk about it again because that's how we do in American History 1. So Northerners and Southerners did not want to upset the equal balance of free and slave states, specifically in the Senate. Because if you have more southern states, that means you have more southern senators, and that means there's going to be an imbalance of power within the United States Senate, meaning that southerners, slave states, are going to have more power and more authority within government. And the North wasn't having that. They didn't want that to happen. And also, Northerners did not want slavery to spread beyond the Deep South. So this region, this Cotton Kingdom that we've talked about already, all this down here, Northerners didn't want that to spread. They saw slavery as a threat to the Northern way of life. So Northerners did not want to have to compete with slave labor. Westerners didn't want that to happen either. You can't really compete with labor that you don't have to pay for, where you just have a one-time fee and then that's it. They just couldn't compete with it, and they really did not want slavery to spread outside of that. They were afraid of the idea of slaves working in factories and competing with northern labor and immigrant labor, and they just didn't have any interest in that occurring. And also, Southerners did not think Congress had the power to stop slavery as well. So you have these two groups that are at odds with each other. Northerners who don't want slavery to spread, and Southerners who just felt like slavery was just their way of life, and it should exist no matter what within the United States, wherever it is it can exist. So these two groups at odds with each other over what to do about this thing, what to do about Missouri, whether it can slavery can exist within that territory, how to maintain that balance of power, and where slaves should actually be at within the United States, and what it is the government could actually do about all that. So, boop. Rolling right along here. We're going to address this question in class, but I'm not going to do it right now. So think about this from both sides, both standpoints. Northerner and Southerner, what do you do about this Missouri Compromise thing, and how do you feel about the results of it? So in 1820, Henry Clay ends up negotiating the Missouri Compromise, which we're familiar with. Missouri ends up becoming a slave state, mostly because there's slaves already within Missouri. It's a territory, there's people living there already. Southerners have mostly occupied that region, started using it to grow cotton, and a few other crops as well, but mostly cotton, and they've brought slaves with them. So if it became a free state, it probably would have caused a lot of problems within Missouri, just removing all of the slaves and making that state free. So Missouri is going to quite obviously, according to Congress, become a slave state. And in order to maintain that balance, because that's the big issue, is maintaining that balance of power between free and slave states, Maine is going to become a free state. It's going to separate off from Massachusetts. It was part of Massachusetts up until this point. It's going to separate off, and it's going to become an independent free state. So you have that balance of power maintained. A free state and a slave state have been admitted. So yay, happy day. There's a nice little balance in Congress. Also, to create a way to fix problems in the immediate future. It's not going to fix the long-lasting problems within the United States when it comes to admitting new territory, but just a nice little band-aid to fix that problem. They create the compromise line, the 3630 line, part of the Missouri Compromise, saying that any other state that would be admitted into the Union, if it was above this line, with the exception of Missouri, of course, if it was above this line, it would be free. It would be free. Slavery would be banned within that territory. And then everything below that line would be a slave state, a slave territory. Slavery can exist there. It creates this precedent that anything within this Arkansas territory can become slave. Anything up here can become free. But we've talked about this as a temporary solution. The primary reason being there's a lot more land up here in the north. So that's eventually going to lead to an issue with Southerners. They realize, hey, there's a lot more land up here. It's not difficult to see. If you can read a map, you can notice it. So what's going to happen when we run out of space and Northerners keep spreading west and keep becoming more and more free states? That balance of power isn't going to be maintained for very long. And Northerners are going to have a lot more power in the Senate. So temporary solution to an immediate problem. I think I'm going to stop that right here, just talking about the Missouri Compromise, and I may